Okay, we can get started. First of all, if there are any further questions about the last lecture, feel free to ask them. Also, as I mentioned, you don't need to wait for the end. If there is something that comes to your mind, just raise your hand and we can accommodate as we speak. Now, as I mentioned, first of all, the key message that we're trying to convey to the students is that on top of your professional skills, on top of your professional work, you better also worry about the business aspects of trying to make something happen. Namely, the fact that you invented something by itself has no impact as long as it doesn't get eventually to the hands of the people who could use it. Okay? The customers, the users that will be influenced by your invention. So you better worry also about making it happen from a business point of view. Now, specifically in our programs, we don't at all worry about the technological aspects except for things that are obvious. Like if somebody says, hey, I have an invention how to take iron and make gold out of it, okay, so we may tell him, think twice whether this is something that's going to work. Okay, but we're not going to help you make it happen or tell you why it may or may not work. Our job is, if you invented something like that, okay, who may benefit from it, how would you make it a business, how you make it profitable, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, in both cases, both in our classes as well as in our experiential programs, we usually call what is called a lean startup model. The basic idea of lean startup means that, and I'm not going to spend time on it here, is the fact that you don't need to be perfectly correct from the beginning, but rather you start with something and you evolve as you go, okay? And what you need to be is very fast on your feet to be able to, you know, turn things. If you realize that something is a dead end, okay, then do a recalculation of where you want to go and probably take what is called pivoting, go to another direction. Those kind of things, okay, is something that you better adopt as your style, as your way of operating. But what you need to know is basically what is it that you take in order to make a business happen. So this is based on a class that actually my successor, Dr. Dana Scheffer, has developed as a class, and personally I did not teach it actually. She's teaching it, and but it is conveying in a very condensed manner the key elements of what does it mean to run a business, okay? As you will see also, interestingly enough, let me go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, yeah, it works. Sorry. Is that the first? Yeah. No. I'm sorry. It's going the wrong direction. Sorry. No. I'm sorry, something is not working right here. Okay. So I hope now it's going to work. We'll see. Notice below the line all the time, there's usually quotes. They're usually from certain books. There are, like, you know, books that teach entrepreneurship. Okay, most of them are American books. So you will see that from time to time, quotes are being, she simply took quotes from those books that convey the message. So you could, you know, acquire those books, take them in the library or whatever, if you would like to know better. So business model, as described in that book, is describe the rationale of how an organization creates and delivers and captures value. Okay, we're going to talk later on about value proposition, or about the fact, what does value mean and what does it mean to create a value? Okay, so, okay, now I know. Okay, so what is a business model? Okay, that's what I mentioned before. Okay, usually you start with something, and as you proceed, you realize that some of your assumptions were not that accurate, and you need to go back and revisit either the target market you go after, or the specific segment that you go after, we'll discuss that, or the proposition that you're trying to make there, or your whole concept, or and so on and so forth. It's called, the term we're using is pivoting. You may know it from basketball or whatever. Pivot means you go in one direction and you make a change. Sometimes it's 45 degrees, sometimes it's 90, sometimes it's 180 degrees. It depends on your specific case, but it is making a change in the direction. What is important is you need to start thinking about it and discussing it from day one, okay? Namely, in your mindset. This is what is important. It's important, especially if sometimes you see a young team working and they work very, very hard on the technological aspects of your solution and so on and so forth, and they don't realize that, you know, at the end of the game, it's not going to fly unless you have a business that is bringing money. Because, you know, if nobody pays your salary and so on and so forth, the business dies. And there was a question before about the success rate, right, of what percent of companies succeed, okay? From those that fail, okay, about half of them fail because they ran out of money. Okay, there are many other reasons, but one of the reasons is you have something that could be successful, could be even be smashing success, in your minds definitely, okay, but you couldn't find the funding to keep it going. And sometimes you put your own savings into it and so on and so forth, but at a certain point in time you run out of thing and you simply close shop because you can't bleed anymore, okay? So thinking about money and thinking about business is important from day one. Now the canvas, I don't know if you know the term canvas. Canvas is basically, I mean, what painters are using in order to paint their paintings, okay? But it is a pictorial way of describing your business. And we're going to show you here the business canvas that is usually being used as in this lean startup model, okay? It shows the model, okay? And this is the end result. Okay, and if you see there are 8 elements in it, okay, and we're going to discuss each and every one of those elements. Generally speaking, in order to be successful, you need to worry about all 8 of them. Not from day one, not in the intensity or whatever, but you need to have the big picture in your mind from day one of what you're going to go after, and over time you should, let's say, usually people have every so-and-so, every month or every 2 months or whatever, a review of where you're doing. It would be good to present this in front of your team and ask, okay, are we doing well here? Are we doing well here? Did you think about this? Did you think about that? To have at least the big picture. And it's legit to say, okay, I'm not going to worry about distribution at this stage. I'm going to worry about it later, or about pricing, or about whatever, okay? But at least to have the big picture so that you can make a conscious decision on what to focus and what to not to focus, and to make sure you don't forget any of the aspects. Okay, so let's talk about customers first, okay? And by the way, the term customers first is important, okay? By the way, when I worked at Intel, okay, and that goes back, I left Intel 25 years ago, okay? There we had values, and the value number 1 at Intel was customer satisfaction. Even then, okay, that it was clear that without customers, you don't have a business. They're paying your bills, okay? So sometimes we hate our customers, they're a pain in the ass and so on, but okay, without them, you don't have a business, so you better worry about them. So we talk about customer segments, okay? as mentioned here, it's the heart of your business. This is taken again from a specific school, book. Okay, the quick questions are, for whom we are creating values. Okay, let's take an example. Suppose you have a medical equipment invention or product. Okay, who is your customer? Okay, it's not that simple to answer. And by the way, it could be more than one. Some people can say, okay, maybe it's the patient. Suppose it's some kind of a, let's say, a counter, how do you call it, when you have too much sugar? Diabetes, yeah. So counter-diabetic pump or something, whatever, okay? So you can say, hey, the customer is the patient that is using it daily. Or maybe it's the doctor, the physician that is deciding whether to use this solution or another solution. Or maybe it is the purchasing, I mean, in the case of other equipment, maybe it's the purchasing department of the hospital that decides whether to spend money on this or not. I mean, it's not simple. There is no one answer. Sometimes there is one answer, sometimes not. But you need to ask yourself, okay, who is the person that basically benefits from your product and that makes a decision whether to spend money on buying it? These are, in my mind, the two questions that lead you on this discussion. Okay, so we all the time talk about customer segments, and a segment is a subgroup of your customers that are with a common something. It could be a common need, it could be a common lifestyle, it could be a demographic profile, whatever it is, okay? And here are going to be a few examples, okay? It could be that because of the specific need, there is a specific offer. By the way, sometimes you see banks or travel agencies or whatever direct to a specific segment and say, hey, if you are 40 years and older and your income is so and so and so, we have a special program for you of saving or of whatever, or loan, or whatever it is, okay? Sometimes different distribution channels, how you get to those customers. We're going to discuss that in a minute. The relationship that you have with them, sometimes it's simply supplier and customers. Sometimes it needs special treatment. It needs ongoing visits, whatever it is. Or sometimes it's the value that you give them. Some people are willing to pay more than others for specific aspects of specific products. Okay, now mass market products are products that don't go to a specific segment. And just a simple example, umbrella, okay? An umbrella could be, I mean, yes, there are specific umbrellas with designs that show, I don't know, characters that kids love from their cartoons, then they clearly go after kids or things like that. But generally speaking, an umbrella everybody needs, okay? Or a monitor of a TV screen, okay, something like that. Something that goes for the mass market, or all sorts of you know, appliances, ovens or refrigerators or whatever. Okay, so they are mass market product usually, and then there are specific products that go to niche markets. Okay, the example they give here is automobile parts manufacturers. Clearly, it's being sold to you know, to manufacturers of cars, or in the case of garages, to people who are maintaining cars and so on. So you could be segmented, namely you give different offering to different customers. The example they give here is, suppose there is sort of banking solutions. If you're rich, okay, then they give you different kind of programs than if you are, you know, young and not yet rich. Okay, then probably you're more. Some things are more important to you than others. Okay, like liquidity, like making ends meet, and so on. An interesting example is, you think about Amazon, okay? Amazon is on one hand is, you know, they clearly, like Alibaba today, you know, that you buy things on. But now they are the world leader in cloud solutions. Clearly two different businesses, which may not be related at all, but they're both you know, with the same company or run by the same company. Or the fact that you need to depend on two sides. For example, on a credit card company, okay, on the one hand, you need to have those holders. I mean, take Visa, okay? The fact that I have a Visa and not a MasterCard, okay? Then I'm a customer of them and not of them, or vice versa, okay? But also the businesses that are running them. A good example may be the fact that I used to have American Express card, or some people have Diners Club or something like that. The problem is almost none of the shoppers are willing to take it, okay? So after a while, I simply gave it up because it was not useful for me. Anytime I go and buy something, they say, no, we don't deal with American Express, okay? So what do I need it for? So you need to have both ends. You need to have the car holders that are going to use it, and you need to have the businesses that are respecting it, okay? Or, you know, if you have free newspapers, I don't know if you have here free or they're all, you pay for them or something, okay? Clearly, in both cases, by the way, even if they're not free, you depend on having readership, and the newspapers compete on, we have so many readers during days or during weekends and so on, and then advertisers, okay? I'd rather advertise on a newspaper that goes into 2 million people than it goes to 2,000 people, right? I mean, the advertisement is being seen by many more eyeballs. Okay, so I'm willing to pay more for that or whatever it is as an advertiser. So, and by the way, it's the same about the electrical media, you know, I mean, and certain companies build their, actually their income on advertisements. So their challenge is to get to as many eyeballs as possible, and then to sell, you know, real estate area on the screen to advertisers. And the examples you see is sometimes that a company that never made a penny is being sold for billions of dollars just because of the number of users that are using them for free. Because this is how you get attention to advertising and so on. Okay, so we talked about customers. Now we're going to talk about so we covered only one segment out of the 8. Now we talk about the value proposition. Namely, this is what you are offering or providing to the customers. It could be as quantitative or qualitative. Namely, it could be something that gives you an experience or something like that. You can't put a number on it, but it's exciting. It's I don't know how many of you are using, I guess, WhatsApp or Instagram or whatever. Okay, it's not that you can put an exact value on it, but it's an experience of sharing with your family or sharing with your friends and so on, and all the communities that come in that and so on. It has a lot of qualitative value, and sometimes it's quantitative, you know, I mean, something that you can measure and say, hey, this is cheaper, or this gives you stronger or bigger or whatever it is. It answers 3 questions. Which customers are you going to serve, which is the customers that we discussed before? Okay, what need are you going to meet, and what relative price are you going to charge? Okay, that's the value. If you try to articulate the value, again, as I mentioned, it's taken from another book in this case. I had a discussion with Wolfgang before on another topic, and one thing I realized that many people think about the creation of value from the solution space. Namely, all of you or most of you are researchers. You invent things, okay? And once you invented this thing, you ask yourself, okay, what is it good for? Okay? Now, it's better than not thinking about it, but the right business way of looking at things is identifying a need in the market and then ask yourself, okay, can I build a solution that addresses this need? In the afternoon, we're going to talk about the example of Given Imaging, the company that I used to work for, which clearly was need-driven, but there we're going to talk about it in spades. But generally speaking, as I said, an invention is not worth much if it doesn't address eventually some unique needs. And I gave two examples to work on this discussion. One is very famous. It is talking about the fact that in the American space program, they spent millions of dollars to develop a pen that would work in zero gravity for the space. And the Russians used the pencil. Okay? The point is, okay, that the invention could be great. I mean, it could be a great innovation, but it's not needed because you have an alternate solution which is, you know, simple. Okay, so why spend the money on that thing? The basic idea is that you better be driven by a need, okay, and come with a solution for it. For instance, what I mentioned, the other example was when VCs, venture capitalists, you're familiar, I guess, with the term, okay? When they, on the average, a VC sees something like 1,000, you know, teams, ideas, and so on in a year. Usually they get a paper on that and so on, and they go through that, and then they invite somewhere around between 100 and 200 out of this 1,000 for an interview. And eventually they accept somewhere around 5 to 10 companies every year. Okay? Now, when you ask yourself, ask them, how did you pick, or what is the criteria that you used? The number one criteria almost uniformly is not the idea, it's a team. Okay? If they like the team, that specific team that presented to them, they say, we're going to take the team, we're going to discard the idea because the idea may not be worth much. We're going to give them another challenge that they're going to address that is fitting the skills, and they may, you know, conquer the world with that idea. Okay? So with all respect to the product or to the concept and so on, they look more at the skills, they look more at the people's background than the idea itself, because it may be a solution looking for a problem. Okay, so also in your minds, when you, if any of you are business oriented, okay, preferably look at it from the problem space rather than from the solution space. If you identified a genuine need, unmet need, okay, that's the term, a need that doesn't have a solution today in the market, and you come with a solution to that, your success has, I wouldn't say it's guaranteed, you can still make all sorts of mistakes in your way, but it increases substantially your odds of success. Okay? On the other hand, if you have a solution looking for a problem, sometimes you are successful, but it's the exception, it's not the rule. Okay? So that's, I think, a key message of this whole thing. Okay? And then now we're going to talk a little about strategy. We're not going to spend too much time on it. So we're talking about, sometimes it's important to articulate what you look for, okay? To put it in writing and have everybody in your team have that in the back of their minds on everything they're doing. Okay, so, and sometimes it's just a slogan, but sometimes it is given at a certain point in time, we had a clear strategy to grow through acquisitions. We bought companies, okay, and there are companies like Oracle, like Cisco, that's their strategy, okay? Initially they had their own inventions very clearly and so on, but currently they look for good companies that are synergistic with them and buying them, and this way, that's how they're growing. And it's legit, okay? I mean, the end result is that you should be growing your business, you should be profitable at it, you should be successful at it, and so on. Okay, and if you can't invent it in-house, yeah, you know, buy it from the outside. Okay, I don't know how many of you are using, is Waze being used here for navigation in cars? Okay, no. Okay, I mean in the US or in Europe and Israel, it is the most commonly used application. And it was acquired by Google. They simply said because they saw Google Maps is good but not good enough, and they bought Waze, and now it's still being called Waze and so on, but it's owned by Google. Okay, so they grew through an acquisition of a solution. Positioning. Okay, we'll discuss a little about what positioning means. It's you know, always you should ask yourself, not just what am I doing, but also what could the competition be doing. Okay? But by the way, and here I'm mentioning something that all the time when I'm mentoring teams, I'm asking myself, okay, some of them have lots of very nice ideas about this and this application on the smartphone that would help grandfathers or will help children or will do this and will do that. Okay? And I ask them, if you are successful, what prevents me from doing the very same thing and eating your lunch? Namely, okay, what barriers do you have against competition? Okay, in many cases they don't have, I mean, in some cases you can have patents, not on software, but on other products that would protect, you know, that others cannot do what you're doing. Okay, but if you don't have patents, you should have other barriers. It could be distribution channel, it could be being first to market, it should be strategic partners. There are ways of doing it. But if you don't worry about it, you can be successful, but somebody else will enjoy it, not you. Okay, the one who is first to market is not necessarily always the winner of the market. Okay, actually, you need to invest a lot to be the first in the market on you know, plowing new grounds, on getting regulatory acceptance, on building channels and so on. And then somebody else comes and enjoys whatever you built and rides on your own track and he is more successful than you are. Okay. Okay. Again, okay. The third element is what is called channels. Channels means the way you interact with your customers, okay? And it depends on the various stages that you are in, okay? For example, and we're going to discuss it in the afternoon when we give the example of given imaging, okay? You could go through distributors or you could build your own sales force. Both of them are legitimate ways, and you should have a strategy of what to do when. In the example of given imaging, in the United States, we went direct. Okay, we had 100 salespeople on the field visiting customers. In other countries, we worked through distributors. Okay, and simply there were pragmatic reasons why to do it that way. We're going to discuss it in the afternoon. Okay, both of them are legitimate. Okay, when you are working direct, you have more intimate interaction with the customers and so on. On the other hand, it's a lot of it's a burden. It's a lot of money that you put into a sales force or into all the infrastructure and so on. So not everybody can afford doing it. There are also advantages. Let's take the medical market, okay? If there are distributors that are already entrenched in serving certain hospitals or certain, they know how to sell a product to, let's say, oncology or to gastrology or to orthopedian, whatever thing, then if you give them another product which is similar to products they already sold to those hospitals, they do it easy. You know, they use the same salespeople, they use the same contact persons and so on and so on. If you try to build your own infrastructure to get to that, it's going to be very unwise. Okay, so it depends on the situation. Okay, sometimes it is better to use distributors and so on. Okay, and this is here showing that at different stages. Okay, sorry. In different stages, you need to worry about different things. Okay, when you are initially only trying to penetrate, okay, then what you need is first of all awareness that people will be, let's take again the example of medicine, medical or whatever. You need the physicians, the doctors, okay, to be aware that there is this solution coming. And for that, you need sometimes to go into conferences and make presentations there, or to have specific colloquia or kind of gatherings where you present your product and make them interested in the solution. Afterwards, okay, you need to engage in clinical trials in this case, or same will be about you know, other products in other domains. Then you go into deals. Then you need to negotiate, you know, pricing. You need to negotiate what they get, what they pay for, and so on and so forth. until you get a purchase order and so on. When you deliver, you need to make sure, for instance, on-time delivery. You know, I mean, there are certain products that it's okay to wait a month until you get it. In certain products, you want them the next week because otherwise, you know, something happens. By the way, a good example is there are those specific merchandise that go for specific holidays. Okay, I mean, just think about the Christmas season in the US or whatever, okay? So what happens if the product arrives 2 days after the holiday? Okay, I mean, you missed the delivery, that's the end of it. I mean, you as a provider, okay, you lost all credibility. Nobody's going to buy from you anymore, okay? And after sale is also very, very important, especially if you are building a business that is built on many products, okay? You sold the machine, okay, now making sure it runs reliably. Maintenance, response to questions, you know, sometimes it's, hey, I try to do this and then it doesn't work. Press this button, do all sorts of those things. It's all very, very, very important. So in all those aspects, it's important to worry about all the phases. Okay. I talked about direct versus indirect and so on. And as I said, there is no one answer. Okay? It depends on the context, it depends on the product you're trying to do, it depends on the customers, it depends on the geography, it depends on a lot of things. And what you need to do is think very well about the pros and cons of each of the consequences before you decide which way you go. Okay. Customer relationship. Okay, if you noticed, up until now, we were all the time in this right side, which is customer-centric. And it's not by accident, it is because I said customers are the most important element, and you need to worry about making sure that you treat them correctly and so on. So, okay. What type of relationship does the customer need? Okay, in some cases, it's, you know, you put a product on the shelf of a supermarket and they buy it, and that's the end of it. I mean, you know, it's you know, deliver and forget. In other cases, you need to be there for the customer, need to assist him or her to absorb the product, to use it correctly, and so on. Just an observation. I used to have like a VCR, okay? And all the time it was the hour was all the time 12. You know, I mean, the way it came from I never worried into figuring out how to make a clock out of it that would work correctly, or probably I used 1% of the features that had in it. Okay, because I didn't read the manual and nobody trained me and so on, which is true for many products if you think about it. Now, if it is important to use specific features, then you need to make sure they are either very easy to use, okay, or that you give some kind of a training or maintenance or whatever it is to help people use it. My wife, her smartphone broke about 2 weeks ago, and we went and bought another one, okay? So we first went into just in the shopping mall, there was some booth there and so on, and they say, well, we just sell. If you need to transfer your, you know, your contacts lists and your pictures and whatever from the old phone to that, we don't deal with that. Okay, we went across the street. There was a specialty shop there, okay, and she spent about an hour, okay, with my wife, both on making sure that all the information in the old phone was transferred to the new phone, and also how to use the features on the new model, you know, so that she will be effective at it. Okay, she didn't get any money for the service, but we bought from her, okay, and she got it through the fact that she sold to us and not that guy in the mall. So it depends. Okay, but basically, in many cases, especially in sophisticated products and so on, you need to make sure that the customer feels that they got the money worth for whatever they need and that you're there for them. Because then, next time, I know that already who was it? My son wanted to buy a smartphone for his 12-year-old daughter, my grandchild, child. And he asked me, do you know about the shop? Immediately I sent him to this shop because, I mean, we had such a great experience with this lady. We said, okay, buy also for her. So she already gained another customer. So, you know, word of ear and so on is very, very important in those cases. Okay, by the way, today also there is a lot of automated services and so on. Like, in many cases, it's I get lost. I don't know. I mean, many times they tell me go into the website and deal with this and that and so on. And in most cases, I am personally unsuccessful with getting what I need from that. In many cases, I need a person to talk to that is going to tell me the right answer. Sometimes the answer is, you know, takes 1 minute or less to get the answer for the question. And I looked for it and so on, and I got lost and I couldn't. So again, if you are building a business and you build a website and so on, make sure that it is very clear to understand where you can find the answer to your question. Okay, and sometimes it's obvious, in many cases it's not. Okay, good. Revenues. Okay, again, what is revenues? People, you know what I'm talking about, yes? That's the money that you get from a sale, okay? By the way, a lot of people confuse revenues with profits, okay? It's not the same. Revenue is the money you get for a product sold. Sometimes it could be for loss, okay? Andy Grove used to say that you can make a huge business by selling $100 bills for $90. Okay, I mean, everybody's going to buy from you, okay, but you're not going to be profitable that way, okay? So you need to worry also about the profit, but it's a different discussion. So as in this book they say, if your customer is the heart, then the revenues is the arteries that bring the blood into your heart and so on. Okay, so as I mentioned before, when you talk about a customer, it's not just that they're excited about your product. The proof of the pudding is when they say, I'm willing to open my wallet and pay for the product. Okay? Namely, I'm going to get the money for the product that I'm selling you. Okay, so it is the willingness to pay. And then there are questions you can ask yourself is, okay, by the way, I'm going to leave the presentations with you, so if somebody wants a copy, you don't need to write every word. You can borrow the presentations, and they're not syndicated or anything. Many times, this is when I work with teams, okay, and they work about the solution, and they're excited about the ideas and so on. I ask them, what are your customers today doing? Take again, physicians, okay, that they have some patients with a problem and so on, and they are willing to give them now a new solution. So I ask them, what do those physicians do today for their patients or for this problem? And then I ask them, how much does this cost? Okay, and by the way, cost is more sophisticated. Sometimes it's the product, but sometimes it's the cost of ownership. Sometimes it is more involved. But basically speaking, okay, per procedure, per medical procedure, how much does it cost them? Okay, or if it is medical insurance, how much is the insurance willing to pay, and so on. And in some cases, you can provide them with a great solution, but it's going to cost more than what they do now, or more than the insurance is willing to pay. Usually, it's a non-starter. Okay, despite the fact that it is a brilliant solution, looks beautiful, but it's costly. Okay, so sorry, until you get it to the right cost bracket, you don't have a product. Okay, so and the other question is usually volume. Okay, sometimes people are developing a specialized solutions for a very unique population. Okay, now the more narrower the population, the more it could be still a great product for those population. But you may not make money on that. On the other hand, if it is for a huge audience, then you multiply the numbers, okay? Suppose every product costs only $5, okay? But if you sell it to 1 million people, You have a revenue of $5 million. Okay, so it depends not just on how much the product costs, but also what is the market potential for that. Okay, and there's a whole specialty on how you carve out the market, namely how big is it, how much of it is relevant to you, how much is going to be taken by the competition, how much you can sell to, how many of them are willing to buy a new product, and so on and so forth. And you get to eventually some projection of how much it is. Also, one thing that people tend to forget is a product is a one-time sale, okay? You sold it, okay? Once you sold it to that person, he's not going to buy another one from you, okay? Because he already has it, okay? So you ask yourself, okay, great, the first year you sold a lot, now what are you going to do the next year? Okay, so you need to worry about sales per year, not just sales, one-time initial sales, okay? Namely, naturally, if you have recurring revenues from that person, okay? Good example is you bought a printer, okay? And then you buy those ink cassettes, then you need to buy an ink cassette every 3 months, or, and so on. This is recurring revenue. So on this, you can make money, you can make a business, and so on. But on the printer itself, once you sold it, you're not going to sell another printer for another 5 years for that person because he has what he needs, and so on. Okay. Okay, this is, I'm not going to spend time on it, but I'm saying is that there are many ways by which you can generate revenues, okay? It depends on how you position it and what the customer really expects or is willing to pay for. For example, you know, lease and rent is different than buy, okay? I mean, I'm buying an equipment or I'm leasing it on a monthly basis and pay for it and so on. A good example is on specific, we used to have it a lot, I don't know how much it's being used now, on per seat basis. Let's suppose I'm buying some kind of a computer-aided design tool, okay? Then I could buy a global license, let's say for all UNAM, for design, let's say a Gerber system or something like that that designs electrical circuits or designs nanoparticles, something, whatever, and I pay them every month $2,000. Or I could pay per seat, namely by the number of users, and I pay $50 per user. And if there are 100 users, then I pay $5,000. But if I have only 10 users, I'm paying, I don't know, whatever it is, 500, whatever. Okay, so there are all sorts of ways of pricing, depending on the nature of the business, depending on what people are willing to pay for. Okay. You can come up with very nice schemes, but if nobody wants to pay that, you're stuck with your own ideas and your own product, and nobody's buying it from you. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of things that you could do. Okay, now when it comes to the dynamic of pricing, again, they gave here some examples. Okay, so sometimes it's list price. You know, I mean, there are certain, especially if you are big. You're Microsoft, okay? You say the list price of an Office suite, you know, Word and PowerPoint and Excel and so on and so on, costs, it used to cost $200, now it's $5, whatever it is, okay? But that's the price, okay? You are not going to convince Microsoft they're going to give you more or less, I mean, they're going to sell it for you for less money just because you're nice or whatever, okay? There may be other schemes, but list price is list price. Okay, but sometimes you can negotiate, especially with you know, smaller bodies than Microsoft. Okay, depends also on the real-time market. Namely, sometimes over time prices usually drop, especially on electronics, on things of that kind, and so on. So you can say, okay, your price was valid a year ago, but today, okay, your competitors sell it for half price. Let's settle on something that is reasonable. Auctions is also an interesting aspect where you sell for the highest bidder, okay? And it really varies on the nature of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it. Okay. Okay, and as I said, what is important is that you're not going to run out of money, okay? We mentioned before that eventually money is what makes your business tick. So you need to worry not just about the model and so on, you need to worry about cash flow, okay? And many companies closed shop because they had great models and so on, but they ran out of money. They couldn't pay salaries for the workers and so on. So they had no choice. So watch for that. Key resources, we're going to do it very fast. By the way, in many cases, your biggest asset is your people. Okay, and you need to retain them. You need to make sure they're motivated. You need to make sure that they feel they are part of the business. So what startups usually do is they give them stock options so that if the business is successful, they participate in the success. Okay, I can tell you that my home was bought from stock options that I sold from company I worked for. Okay, from salary, it's more difficult to do it because you burn most of your salary on just your living and so on. The nice thing about options or about shares and so on is the fact that it's like a present that you get on top of that. And if it's really hitting big because the company was successful, then this is how you can make big money. So if you build such a startup, make sure that you build a structure so that your key workers, okay, have a motivation for the business to succeed. Because if it succeeds, they succeed also. Physical resources is usually, you know, equipment or things that you have. For example, here in Unam, I understand you have a lot of lab equipment and so on, which is an important resource that you need to maintain, and then you provide it to others as a service or different way. Intellectual property is very, very important, okay? Although commercializing it is very complicated. In most cases, one should use intellectual property more as a protective against competition than as something you will try to sell. There are exceptions to that. There are cases where you could sell your IP to others, but this is tricky. It's not that easy. Human resources is what we discussed. Okay. Key activities, again, I think we're running out of time, so we're going to just give you, okay, so it's obvious in certain cases what you're not supposed to do. In some cases, you develop, like software development, okay. In other cases, it is the supply chain, okay. Dell is very famous. Are you familiar with Dell? Okay. What happened is they were the first to sell PCs, in this case, on home delivery, or on also customization, okay? Namely, okay, he has a slightly different need than I have, okay? Then they are willing to structure or to build the Lego of the PC to suit exactly my need, except for when I go to the shop, I need to buy the models that are available there and so on, and they became very big with that, okay? Consultants usually have very different kind of activities that they deal with and so on. Partners are very important, especially strategic partners. You know, I mean, because you need to understand that, especially if you are new into that business, there are people who are already there, okay, and people who know how to run that business, or also if they enter the customer, they, you know, they roll a red carpet in front of them because they already have a lot of business with them and they like them, and if you go with them, then you get the same treatment that they get, and it's a very effective way to get your foot in the door of customers and so on. In other cases, you need them in order to assist you in the things you're trying to do. So again, key partners are important. Okay. The other point is that, you know, trying to do something by yourself is very difficult. In most cases, You're not in an ivory tower or something like that. You live in the real world, and there, a solution is part of a bigger thing. Okay, so you need to be aligned with other people that are providing the other elements of the solution that you are trying to do. Okay, and there are all sorts of ways to do alliance with a partner. Okay, depends on who brings more value, depends on what is the dependency on the other guy, and so on and so forth. So again, all this it's like a footprint of questions you should ask yourself when you build a business in order to do it. So, okay, the other, I think this is the last element, is the cost structure. Okay, eventually you need to be worried about cost. Okay, because as I mentioned, you don't just need to make revenues, you need to make profits. Okay, so initially you need to worry less about it, but with time, especially if you're product driven, okay, then the cost of building the product. And in our case, for example, with Given Imaging, on certain products, we went to Vietnam for building the labor-intensive parts of the product because the salary there was somewhere around $100 a month, okay? While in Israel, it was like $3,000 a month or whatever for a skilled operations worker, or $2,000 a month, something. So 20 to 1, you cannot be effective in competing with such low cost. So if your work is, your product is labor intensive, and if we're talking about volumes, okay, namely not about, doing some specialty thing, you better worry about countries with low labor costs and so on. Yeah, the other thing to worry about is fixed cost versus variable cost. That's something that a lot of people confuse with. Okay, if you build a factory, okay, there are certain sunk costs that are there. Okay, the rent cost or the cost that you put into building the thing, or the cost of the equipment and so on is there, whether you use them or not use them. Okay, other cost is variable, like electricity. Okay, when you don't run, on the hours that you don't run, turn down the lighting and the air conditioning or whatever, and it doesn't cost. Labor cost is, some of it is fixed, like if you have specific workers that get salary on a monthly basis, they get the salary whether they do something or whether there is no work for them. On the other hand, hourly workers, you bring them in when you have an order for building, let's say, 1,000 new pieces of equipment, and you let them stay at home without pay when you don't need them. Okay, it varies, but you need to understand which part of the cost is there in your structure regardless, and which one of them is dynamic and varies with the things that you're trying to do. Okay, and economy of scale, by the way, is very, very important, and because of that, in some cases, you'd better go for big deals, even if you get less margin on your product, okay, because they fill your factory, because other products may ride on the fact that you are building, in any case, so many thousands or millions of units every month because of those big deals. So it's very important to, especially on products that are either commodities or that can gain from volume, to go for economy of scale. Okay, this is now, this is now the whole model, as I mentioned, and again, we're teaching our students to ask all those questions as they go through their building of their own model and have their own answers that are context specific to their own product. I'm not going to dwell on that, except for if you look at the difference, I mean, it's again taken from the book, is you see that the word that is most common here is the word we. Okay? How can we do, how can we? Okay? While here, it's the word our customers. Okay? Namely, the question you should ask yourself is not how are we doing, but what do we need to do for them? Okay? It's a mindset thing. So bear in mind that. Okay. And this is the end of the presentation, basically. There are two examples here given. I'm not going to go into all the details of them. One of them is this canvas, okay? Namely, what you need to do, this is how the exercise actually works. At the end, if you take like the example of a class that you build, where you built your own business model, at the end of it, you use usually a big sheet of paper where you do those, you know, those 8 or 10 segments, whatever it is, and then you use sticky things and you put the specific examples of your own product on them. So some people did the exercise for Visa credit card, okay, or Visa is a company that is providing the deal for a credit card, and then you can see, okay, who are your customers, okay, who are the key partners, okay, what is the value proposition you give them, okay, examples like, you know, cashless payments and so on and so forth, and so on and so on. Okay, so this is just a methodology of how you experience with that on your own product. And the other example is, again, a Google business model, which is a very different model than Visa naturally, and it's on and so on. I'm not going to go into the details of it, okay? But let me now go back to the basics, okay? The key there is to convey that you need to worry about not just what I'm trying to solve, or the technology, but also about how I'm going to make a profitable, successful business out of it. And in order to do that, I need to worry about all the elements of the business model, not all of them from the beginning, and not all of them in the same level of detail, but to have them in our mind and to ensure that sooner or later, I'm going to think about each and every one of those elements of the solution. Okay, questions? Yes?
I have a question in mind specifically for hardware-based high-tech industry.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes you would need to seek out some venture capital funding at some stage.
Right.
There are different stages at which you can get this. Like you could have this at the idea stage, or at the prototype stage, or maybe after the first sales stage, etc. And the conditions you would get from VCs would be vastly different. Of course, the earlier you go, the less prone you are, but the earlier you get the money, the faster you can go to later stages.
Mm-hmm.
So is there some rough rule of thumbs on where to position yourself at this stage at which you go after VC capital?
There is no rule of thumb, and the answer would vary vastly on what the product is, on who the customers are, on also who the ventures are, and so on. I would say the best thing I can say is use somebody who has experience in that to guide you through the process. Somebody who has already done it and understands the rule of the game, because it's easy to make mistakes there, okay? And if I make a general observation, hardware products by definition are more challenging and more difficult, okay? Because in software you don't invest much. I mean, it's easy and so on, okay? On the other hand, the barriers for competition are much higher in hardware, okay? The other point is that usually experienced people who did it before, okay, will get much easier funding from VCs than somebody who's trying it for the first time. So alliance with such people or having such people on your team usually will open doors easier. Okay? On the other hand, be cautious not to do an investment that will be later on killing your business, because in some cases you cannot afford it. So it needs to be done very carefully. Yes, you had a question?
So my question is about how do you motivate your partners? Why should a partner come and work in this type of company?
Partners means people working for you or external? What do you mean by partners?
Well, in the graphs that you have key partners.
Key partners are not employees of yours.
Yes.
They are other companies or other entities. Yes.
So how do you motivate these companies or entities to work with this type of company?
Clearly they should have something to gain from working with you. Otherwise, I mean, or if it is your girlfriend or your parents, it's a different story. But usually I recommend don't do business with family. That's a different story. Okay, but assuming they have their own business to run and so on, they should have something to gain from partnering with you. Okay, so the way to motivate them is by presenting what's in there for them. Sometimes it is just they invest in you, and since you're sure you're going to be very successful, they're going to share, let's say you get 10% of your business, okay? And then if you're successful, they have 10% of success. In other cases, it is that it also enlarges their own sales, okay? On each product that you sell, they also sell their own product. Or there are all sorts of other aspects. It depends on the context. But the key there is, by the way, this is something that is very important also in psychology, okay? It is look at things not from your own eyes, but in their own eyes, what it looks like. Okay, put yourself in their position, ask yourself, okay, if I were there, why should I, join forces with this new venture? And if you have a good answer, then it may sell to them as well. Okay, so that's the approach. Yes?
Thank you for the presentation. I mean, imagine that you have a brilliant idea before to start your work. How you can protect your idea? Because it happened to me. I had an idea. I started to create a company with my partner, and she was a bit jealous, and she just wanted to have my own idea, and I just had to burn it. So, and I had to think how I can protect my idea before I started to work. Because I believe that it's a really good idea, I can work on it, I can improve it. What should I do?
It depends on which is the nature of the idea. Sometimes it is, again, issuing a patent to protect it. It depends if it's hardware, it depends if it's patentable or not, and so on. As I said, a word of caution, okay? For example, as I said, VCs, in most cases, they don't care about the idea. With all respect to the brilliance of the idea and so on and so forth, they say, okay, we've seen tons of similar ideas before, very nice. Okay, tell me what is the problem you're trying to solve, okay? Not what invention you have in mind, okay? And if it is related to something that you could, take people that you trust, okay, and try to build a proof of concept, okay? Try to build something that will convince potential users or potential customers that it is really worth something. And ask yourself all the time the question of how do I prevent others from doing the same? Sometimes it is, as I said, a patent. Sometimes it is running as soon as you can to be the first and so on, or to build some relation with somebody that could make use of it ahead of your competitors or somebody who tried to clone it. Okay, there is no one answer, but I'm saying is be careful also not to be in love with your idea too much, because then you get blindfolded about about realism of life. So, and if it is a brilliant idea and so on, then you will find a way to find partners that are going to make it happen. You're welcome. Yes, this is going to be the last question. After that, we part for about almost 2 hours, till 2 o'clock, right? Yes. 2:30. Okay, whatever. Yes.
So you said 50% of the companies fail because they run out of money. 50% of the companies that fail, okay, something like, I actually have a presentation. I think it's less than 50, but it's in practicality. Now, the reason behind it may be that they had the wrong product, or they had the wrong something, or whatever it is, or they did some poor moves. But the symptom is that they ran out of money. So my
yes.
Why they run out of money? Because they don't have a customer, or they are too late, or too early for the market? Or
Like in the example that he gave, you need to put a lot of money in order to build an infrastructure before you have something to deliver. Okay, so even if you had a customer, and even if you're waiting, if you cannot build a product because it takes so much money to invest in it, in order to make it happen and so on, then you may run out of money. So, for example, in the semiconductor industry, which I'm very familiar with, okay, we have this foundry and fabless combination. So you don't need to build a factory in order to build something. You just need to design it, and then there's a whole supply chain that will provide it for you, and so on. So the investment in capital or anything like that is very modest. In some other industries, it's more difficult or more different. But let's take a simple example, okay? Employees, okay? I mean, they work for you usually for salary, okay? Now, you raised $200,000. That is going to last you for 6 months, 12 months, something like that. If you cannot raise more money after that, you don't have where to pay your employees, unless you start burning your own savings or something, okay? So sooner or later, you're going to run out of money, okay? So in most cases, it's because you weren't able to attract an investor, okay, that is going to get you to the next stage. We discussed a little this model. It basically, usually, I don't know how it works in Turkey, okay? I know it works in Israel. Usually up to about between $300,000 and $500,000, you can get all sorts of sources of funding, some of them from the government, some of them from municipalities, some of them out of some private investors or whatever. From 3 million on, okay, usually you go to the big guys, VCs, banks, you name it. There is what we call the death valley, between $500,000 and 3 million, which is very, very difficult to cross, okay? That's where most companies die. Okay, because they cannot get this next level of funding, which is not anymore $100,000. Okay, it's $1 million, $2 million. Okay, if they don't get this funding, okay, I managed a startup for about a year ago. Okay, and I went to a lot of friends of mine. Okay, that are VCs and so on, and I said nice and so on. I'm not interested. Or I'm now busy with doing other things, or whatever it is, okay? So I banged on something like 20 doors until I found one door that I was willing to secure $1.5 million, okay? So it's not easy. Even if you have your reputation, and even if you have a great product and so on. So I think that's where most people die, because they cannot get this next level of funding. Okay, and it has to do with the team, and it has to do with the product, it has to do with the problem you're trying to solve, with all those elements that we discussed. Okay, you need to have many things right in order to have somebody believe in you enough to open his wallet, because if you fail, he failed. He put in you $2 million, okay, and you closed shop, okay? Gone, the money is gone. So they are doing it because they also want to make money. Okay, so you need to convince them that their investment is secure, is going to bear a lot of fruits, and so on. So it's not easy. Yes?
So does the software companies have a higher chance of success compared much less cost?
No, not necessarily. Okay, it's easier to cross some of the barriers, but the odds of success, first of all, if you go to, I mean, I have on my smartphone this shop, Google Shop, or I don't know, you call it that you can buy applications or can download application?
App Store.
App Store, yeah, okay? There are millions of applications there. 90% of them are freeware, okay? Namely, you have this application, okay? But first of all, you sell it for free. I mean, in most cases. B, for each one of them, there are probably 100 different people who do the same thing. Okay? So why take it from you and not from somebody else? And how are you going to make money out of it? You know, I mean, what is your model and so on? Not easy. Or even if you are successful, there are going to be others who are going to try the same thing. Okay? For example, I read in many, I mean, people said, hey, Facebook cannot fail and so on. The youngsters don't use Facebook anymore. They use Instagram, they use some other things and so on. Okay, so there is new fashion or new something and so on. So nothing is built to stay. I mean, you need to we're going to discuss it in the afternoon a little, but it's something that you need to re-innovate and things of that and so on. So the barriers for entry in software are lower, okay? But that doesn't guarantee success, okay? So be careful with that, okay? But yes, if you need a hardware product, then the challenges of upfront investment are much higher. Thanks. Thank you for your time. Good. Thank you.